welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a continuation in the fantastic series by James Mitchell, author of the Creek in the Woods storyline. As ever though, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. Well, it really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story. Entitled Creek in the Woods. A reckoning in the woods. Let's get straight into that. Timing, well, it's everything. Universal truth. That night by the creek, I did what I had to. They did what predators do. In a way, I was at peace with that. Even as deep down the rabbit hole as I was, it had order to it. The things were predators and mistook me for prey and paid for it. The next mistake was mine. Trying to send a message of dominance, I woefully underestimated my adversaries in every way that I could have. Had my wife not got there when she did, I would have paid for it. And if I'm being honest, the next mistake was mine as well, and an innocent person paid the ultimate price for it. I kicked the hornet's nest and the ranger got stung. At the hospital, after the attack, my wife obviously didn't tell them that I had been attacked by a pack of upright walking wolf creatures. And when I woke up, they had assumed it was a bear, and I didn't say different. The so-called missing ranger was no doubt sent to take a look. Why they didn't find these things, I don't know. The scar showing up at my house continued this cycle and cemented my resolve. Having already underestimated these creatures twice, I came back to find out how many of these things there were and where they'd denned at. It had gone well in that regard. In the end, I had a rough guess on the number of these things, and I knew where the den was. I didn't fathom that a creature like that brute could exist, let alone how strong it was, and I paid for it. I had assumed that the beast in my camp had been the alpha male, and I was wrong. The brute was the alpha. The pup in the camp that first night had been his. As I let the warmth of the fire soothe my aches, I tried to understand all that I had learned. My left shoulder was dislocated. I had tried to pop it back into place hours ago, but it wasn't right. My ribs and back were bruised on the side that impacted the tree. My face was ripped by the blunt claws of the smaller creature. And thank God it had missed my eye with its wild flailing. My ear, I wasn't so lucky, when I could feel that it was split. It was when I stood up, or rather tried to stand up, that I realized just because you ignore pain doesn't mean the joint is going to work. This whole time, I had ignored the pain from my knee. I had inevitably refused to cooperate. I laughed out loud as I fell back to my log of a seat at how pathetic I had to look. I smoked what was left in my dugout and watched as my lord painted the most beautiful sunrise I had ever witnessed. My body may have been tatters, but my spirit was refreshed and my mind was clear on what I needed to do and all that I had learned. The sun was fully up and I expected my wife to arrive shortly. The first car I had heard on the road behind me since making the fire wasn't my wife's. When it stopped at a turnaround, I truly was surprised. 2 short horn blasts then, 1 long one. It was a signal, followed by, "Your fucking ass better not be dead, asshole." I recognized their voice and I can't say it put me to ease, but it was better than my wife seeing me in this state. "I'm over here, prick," I yelled to my brother as the peaceful feeling I was enjoying evaporated. The smirk on his face, it was annoying. I could tell he was kind of enjoying my disheveled appearance. "You look like shit," he said, but the crack in his voice was enough for me to understand his concern, and how bad I must have really looked. "Better than they do, and still better than you," I said. "Help me up. I need you to set my shoulder better." I groaned as I tried to lean forward and stand, and he positioned himself to do what he had done more times than we probably should have growing up. After the audible pop, I let go to the pain. The echo sounded like a roar to me, and I hoped to those who could hear it as well. While gathering my stuff and putting the fire out, it occurred to me that my wife went over my head and decided on the nuclear option. My brother is, to put it delicately, a little shady. You carrying? I asked. I got you, he said and reached into his coat. Oh, that's not what I mean, and you know it, I replied. His grin said the quiet part loudly. In his youth, my brother had been a drywall hanger and finisher by day, and too often a hustler by night. I'd fallen downstairs on stilts carrying a 10-foot piece of drywall. Uninsured, he decided to self-medicate after initial treatment. I wish it was an uncommon occurrence, but tradesmen get hurt a lot and do exactly what he did. Are you armed, dumbass? I asked. You know what's out here? And the grin never left his face. Achilles, he yelled. In the blink of an eye, a very large cane Corso exploded from the open side door, Econoline van, and rushed to his side. This is Achilles. He chuckled as the over 150-pound, very intense dog sniffed at me. He snapped his finger, and the large dog sat right next to me, watching me, and it was a little unnerving. After a year or two, my brother quit hanging drywall and started training and breeding cane Corsos, also known as Roman dogs of war. The truth is, he was good at it, and his dogs were exactly what they were advertised as. The cane Corso is a Mastiff-type dog from Italy, and was known for its size, loyalty, intelligence, as well as having a fierce fighting tenacity. His were exceptional. Achilles is feeling a little edgy, and whatever he smells on you isn't helping, he said in the most serious tone I'd heard from him in a long time. You need to call your wife, wussy. He handed me his phone and took my pack to the van, followed by his dogs. I'm not proud of it, but me and my brother hadn't spoken in years, not since before I left Indiana and moved to Colorado. I ignored my brother's jab at wussy, being the worst insult one could use back when we were kids, and it had carried over into adulthood between us. I put my wife on speaker, and the three of us kicked around ideas for a new plan together. I told them that I knew where the den was. Retrieving the topo map from my pack, I described where the den was in relation to my camp for my wife at home, and circled it on mine. My brother's first attempt at a plan was to grab up rifles and hunt them down, and then burn the den. My wife and I took turns destroying his so-called plan with the hard questions like, and then what? And how? My wife forwarded the idea of calling in a missing hiker report and saying that they had last been seen in the area of the den. As exhausted and beat up as I was, I almost agreed, but the thought of the ranger that had come to investigate my quote-unquote bear attack would have made me very guilty. I asked how many on the search party could get hurt or killed before they would send in the proper equipped people. And my brother actually raised a valid objection. And what would properly equipped G-men do with these things? He asked. Not to mention when they tracked down whose phone actually made the report. No, I'm obliged to handle this myself, I told them. Besides, the ranger was enough guilt for me. I added a little authority to my voice. Everyone who could have been injured by these things were beyond me and us. I said with all the gusto that I could muster. My wife recognized the finality in my voice. My brother just rolled his eyes and said, All right, smartass, what's the plan? Right now I need to rest and see my wife. We head for my place, I told them. I told my wife that I'd see her soon. And stripping out my weapons, I crawled into the back of the van on the padded floor that was little more than a rolling pet bed and passed out next to the very large dogs until I got home. It was early afternoon when we pulled up to my house. My wife had already come with the idea of a cookout as a distraction for the kids, with the addition of the now 4 well-trained and energetic dogs to plat, which didn't hurt. My kids assumed that my brother was just visiting and truly liked their weird uncle who raised such fun playmates. Thankfully, my brother had texted my wife and let her know we were close so that when I spilled out of the van, the kids wouldn't be there and they had went to get groceries. I only trust 2 medications, caffeine and marijuana. And my brother, he can't make a good cup of coffee to save his life, so while I started a pot of good coffee, before getting him to cut me out of my colouring book armour, he laughed at me until I showed him where the smaller one had tore the books covering my lower gut and opposite side thigh in the opening round of the night before. That's what the smaller one did in a panic with dull claws relative to the big ones. I left the statement vague, intentional, not having even really related what I had found to either him or my wife. I need a shower and a pipe. I told him and showed him where I kept the weed. I get a bowl ready and bring my stuff inside. We'll talk after, I said. Removing the bandage, I got to see my torn cheek and ear for the first time. The cheek would heal all right, but I should have stitched my ear. It was split from the cartilage through the lobe, and there was nothing I could do about it now. I thought as I got in the very hot shower and did the one-arm soak scrub repeat dance until the water got cold. After my far too brief shower, I got down a jar of powdered herbs from the closet my wife and I picked up to help with the pain and bruising in my leg and knee. I mixed up the biggest batch I ever made and applied the paste as liberally as I could to my ribs, shoulder and knee. Then wrapping my ribs and knee with the ACE bandages and applying a fresh dressing to my ear and cheek. I got dressed and slung my shoulder just in time to hear my wife and kids returning home. The numbing effects of the paste worked its magic, and I stepped out of the bathroom. After many assurances that I was all right, the kids took the dogs outside to play. I sat my wife and brother down at the kitchen table and began to try and explain what I knew and what I thought about these creatures. I began with the physical differences of these things, starting with the ones like Scar. They seemed to be more canine in both behaviour and appearance than the more frightening counterparts. The way they move is that of a large and very powerful dog that is more uncomfortable than a bear with standing and walking, but seemed to move more fluidly by far on all fours. After commenting on some of the variations I had noticed between the individual animals I had seen and dispatched, I ended my commentary to the captive, an almost disbelieving duo, with, if it's just those things, well, I could look the other way, so to speak. The truth is that from a distance on all fours, they would most likely just be dismissed by an observer as a large dog. After a few questions that I tried my best to answer without guessing as best as I could, I moved on to try and describe the abomination of what the other things are. I tried to be almost clinical with my physical description, telling my wife and brother that the smallest and most likely youngest had been just shy of adulthood and just over 6 foot tall. The brute was easily 10 foot, and I'm probably underselling him. The claws are long, curved and razor sharp, and the arm that powers it is well muscled and dexterous enough to climb trees. These things walk easily upright and are agile and stealthy. Most terrifying is how smart they are. I went on recounting how the brute had planned his approach and was patient enough to wait for me to exit the tree, stressing the fact that he had done it in a way he had not, because the tree would have slowed him at all from tearing me to shreds. He honestly could have half-hearted jumped and reached me. No, it was the fear it should have triggered and the point it made. As if the way they control the others is less horrific. The brute and his kind seem to use them like a hunter uses hunting dogs. They are obviously two separate species, and the relationship between them I would venture parallels very closely to the domestication of dogs by man, but in a much more primal way. The silence at the table was tense as they took in the full weight of what I had just told them. I am sure that it is the only time we ever had a smoke without a word being spoken. "And you want to go back?" my brother asked. "Are you suicidal or stupid?" Those things followed me to my home, not to mention trying to kill me. I snapped back, this time no time or place for second thoughts or hesitation. Those things didn't just spring into existence from the ether, fully formed. I added. Others have to have had to deal with them before. It's just that turn, wussy. I let the jab sink in, noticing my wife in deep thought. "Love, what do you think we should do?" I asked, wanting genuinely to hear what she thought, and she shook her head. "You're right, they need to be dealt with," she said flatly. We finished the evening as planned, and we ate well and enjoyed each other's company. The plan itself will be direct. The execution is what would take finesse. After the kids went to bed, my brother and I started getting our gear together. For the plan to work, we would have to be at the spot he had met me in the morning at sunrise. And my wife got us new material for our colouring book armour and saved me from another trip to the local freak show known as Walmart. Surprisingly, my brother didn't even scoff at the idea. We made a cover scent and pepper balls and gathered our packs, both working independently together with few words spoken, as only brothers are able to, I think. I was truly grateful to have him there, despite my initial reaction to seeing him, and, in my current state, I'd have no hope of pulling off this finishing gambit. Pax had a good meal for afterwards, if you can call it that. Dehydrated bag of supposed lasagna, a good meal. A medkit more akin to a trauma kit. Loads of water, on top of the bare essentials for a 2-day away from camp hunt. And the paste I put on my shoulder, back and knee to take some of the edge off the pain and help with the swelling was wearing off, reminding me how hard it would be to move and which weapons I would be able to use. Getting the sour from the closet, I applied it liberally and added it to my pack. We have a few hours before we have to get ready to leave. I said, I have 2 rifles you can take, whichever one you like with us. I showed him to the closet that serves as my weapons locker, got out the 2 soft cases containing the Smith & Wesson rifles, one calibered in at 22 long, and one chambered in at a 223. And the differences between these 2 weapons, other than caliber, is all but non-existent. I explained as I removed the rifles. Both weapons are set up the same way, thermal scope with a red dot set on the 45 with a tack light that will light up a football field. As I started to explain the ins and outs of the setup, he stopped me. Before you go into all of that, I have something to show you too. His smile a little unsettling, we went out to the van. Just inside the side door, he pushed something and the side panel opened and folded down. Inside its hidden compartment was a Kevlar dog vest and a thick spiked collar next to a very nice pistol. Retrieving the pistol and clearing it, he handed it to me. 50 cal Desert Eagle, 7 in the mag, 1 in the hole, he said. My last client was impressed with the job I did training his dogs and to hunt pigs. He gave Achilles his own vest and collar. He gave me this beauty right here off his hip. He and his friends used the same setup as your rifles on theirs, he added. Well, I'll put the other tack light on this pack rail, if you want, just as soon as you tell me which you want to take with you. I prodded. Which one do you want to use? He asked. Neither, I said. My shoulder is pretty messed up. Wouldn't really be able to steady the rifle very well. The look on his face betrayed his concern. Are you trying to get killed? His voice rose as he went on. Do you think you're going to go slaughter a pack of monsters with one of your butter knives? The concern on his face twisted into anger as he took a step towards me. I killed 3 with a camp shovel, I said flatly as I turned to go inside. His words echoed loudly. It was midnight when I finished with the guns and loading the magazines. It was time for me to decide which butter knife I was going to use. My Yamato Musashi used a katana in each hand, and my katana had served me well last time. I had practiced one-handed with my katana, and I wish I could say I preferred to, but in truth I liked the more traditional style better. The nuance of the killing strike I used on the brute wouldn't have worked with a one-handed approach, and that wasn't lost on me. Making my decision, I cleaned and sharpened my katana. I think I understand now, more than ever, why the sword held in such a place of esteem in so many cultures around the world. With my sword polished and as sharp as a scalpel, I sheathed it and put it to the side. I repeated the process with a short straight sword my stepfather had given me a very long time ago. The sword, if you can call it that, was a solid piece of high-carbon stainless steel, anodized black. It was as long as the eskrima sticks I had trained with later in life at the Martial Arts Academy. This supposed coincidence put a lump in my throat. He had given me the blade long before I had started my training. He passed before I got married. That blade would have been far more nimble than a katana, and I would put it to use. And the 2 hunted knives I took last time would again be part of this arsenal. It was well into the early morning hours when I finished my preparations. The plan hinged on the timing of us getting to the woods around sunrise, and it would take most of the day to get to where the den was on foot. The stillness of the house, assuming that everyone was asleep, having about an hour or so, we would have to go rest. It didn't seem likely. I started a pot of coffee and woke my wife and brother. We put the colour-in book armour on under our clothes and took the weapons and gear to the van. My boy slept right through it, but my daughter was awake and I told her, and my wife, goodbye, and that I'd call when it was over. And the drive was a chance for us to discuss our approach to the den and our tactics when it started. There were at least 6 of the lessers that I had seen, and I assume at least 2 or 3 more. I hadn't seen the one I split in the camp. Scar, as I've taken to calling him. I also assume that there was a mating pair back at the den site, and I assume that there is at least 3 more of the bigger, more bestial ones I had seen. 2 the morning I killed the brute. I never guessed that a dominant female was at the den, and I hope that I was wrong. The sun was already up when we got to the spot. He had picked me up just the day before. I have to admit, Achilles and my brother all get up really made me feel like we could take on anything. And with a nod, we moved into the woods without a sound, the 3 of us moving with purpose. We were off. Achilles was without doubt very well trained. He moved on my brother's flank, alert and focused as his master seemed to be. We made good time through the woods, better than I thought we would. And just after noon, we stopped and rested not far from my original camp. Well, we're getting close, I said quietly. My brother checked his pistol and then racked his rifle. Achilles' hair bristled. Ready, he said. Silently, the 3 of us slipped through the woods. And just before the sun started to lick the top of the trees, we made it into the clearing where the brute had fallen. Well, the smell of dead beasts was thick in the air, and I could see that Achilles was getting anxious. Watching the 2 of them today gave me a whole new respect for both my brother's skill and the unparalleled greatness of his companion. He had never used a leash or command that I'd seen all day, yet Achilles was never more than a couple of steps behind him. The lesser ones that had gotten a snout full of pepper had run in the direction of a small creek, and we would look for a good spot to rest and wait there. The day's hike on top of my injuries was starting to take their toll. We found a good spot with a little cover in the direction of the den site. In hushed tones, I said, "This is where we'll leave our packs." I took the dugout from my bag and loaded us both 1 hitter of weed. This was apparently too much for my brother, who shook his head and laughed, accepting the 1 hitter. I put a finger to my mouth in a universal shh sign. "Don't get greedy hearing that," I whispered. "It'll choke you." "You are crazy," he said, a little too accusingly. "You haven't seen anything yet," I said as I felt a smile grow on my own very sore face. "I'm about to go fight abominations you can't imagine. Half broken already with God's grace and steel. 1 more to take the edge off and we'll move. It's almost time," I whispered. I repeated loading the 1 hitters. Our gear stowed, we made our way to where I'd seen the brute come into the clearing. The orange and red sunset had given way to the deep shadows of evening when we got into position. The sound of animals stirring in the distance was my cue. "Wait until the first one falls before you loose, Achilles," I said sternly as I moved to get some space, and him hopefully a good shooting lane for anything rushing me. I had made it about 30 yards when a howl rang out loud and powerful. A howl of dominance and challenge. "All right, here we go," I thought as I took a deep breath, and then another, letting the echoes of this howl fade before I roared my challenge. And drawing my sword and holding it high, I pushed the primal, unintended scream until my lungs burned. I hardly had time to inhale when I heard the crashing of its approach. And as he erupted into the clearing, he was moving full tilt, and the correction in his line of attack made him stumble. He didn't slow or pull up at all, and when he got close enough, he launched himself towards me recklessly, twisting in the air like he was trying to land on me with all 4 claws. His exuberance betrayed his inexperience, and I waited in that split second like a batter in the majors. And when he was close enough, I sidestepped and swung the sword with intent to slice him in half. He twisted in the air and avoided my strike, falling hard on his shoulder and back, and I was on him before he could regain his feet. Swinging from my hip, I separated his head from his body. I didn't even have a chance to turn when I was knocked off my feet by one of the smaller ones. Somehow, as we fell, it impaled itself on my sword. I rolled the dying and snapping abomination off of me, using the katana as leverage. And struggling to get to my feet, I could hear the rapport of the rifle. I scanned the scene. It looked like my brother had put another bestial one down as it came into the clearing, and two more of the smaller ones as they were coming towards me. 2 out of 3, I thought. Achilles had attacked the nearer lesser one when my brother loosed him, and when I spotted him was about to bite the throat out of the creature. My brother was moving towards his dog and shooting up more of them in the tree line that I couldn't see. I made it to my brother and Achilles as he was changing a magazine and a rifle, and Achilles was finishing his quarry. Seeing this well-muscled cane corso next to the abomination, the differences between the two were subtle. The corso was smaller, but not by much, the hourglass build of the creature being the only obvious thing one would notice. Let those run, they are trying to lead you away from the den, I said a little louder than I had meant to. And there was a long pause where he just kept looking in a direction he had been shooting. And when he looked at me, finally his expression was blank. "Hey!" I yelled this time and grabbed him with, unfortunately, my left arm. The pain reminded me how much we needed to get this done. I was almost spent physically. "We move now. Are you with me or not?" I growled through gritted teeth. Yeah, I'm with you," he said. I was already heading in the direction my first opponent had come from when I heard him charge the rifle and whistle once, and with that we were moving in sync again. The moon was bright and large in the early evening sky. I had cleared the treetops, making following the trail of the young back. The moon was bright and large in the early evening sky. I had cleared the treetops, making following the trail of the young one back to the den, like walking down a 4-lane highway. I don't know what I expected the den side of an upright wolf-like creature to look like, but what we found was grotesque and well thought out all at once. A pile of deer and elk skulls in various stages of decay, all faced a fallen tree, with a hole dug out of the hill behind the roots. The roots of the tree were decorated with skulls of bears and large antlered elks that would have been at home hanging from the walls of any big game hunter. The head of the ranger was impaled on a small tree, facing the mouth of the hole, in the hillside, in a mockery of a way I left the head of the beast that night. There was no other approach to the den than a direct one. The smell was intense and as offensive as the sight before us. My brother took the lead on approach to the opening of the den, since he had the light and the rifle. I was angled to the opening and scanning the trees behind us, not wanting to get surprised by the ones my brother had chased away from our initial skirmish. The light of the rifle, even from a distance, illuminated that den, and it was dug down, then abruptly turned to the right. As we moved towards the mouth of the den, a deep growl came from deeper within. The growl was low and menacing. I turned to face the opening and the source of that threat. My brother crouched as he edged closer to the den. When he was about 10 feet from the roots that formed the entrance and framed the hole, he took his left hand off the rifle and held it out flat for Achilles. The well-trained canine took his position almost instantly. The opening was tall enough I could have stood in it without ducking, but my brother is 4 inches taller than me. I would have to stay crouching to navigate the entrance and the roots above it. My brother turned the light off of the rifle and slung it to draw his pistol. As soon as the light was out, a roar came from inside the den. Achilles darted into the hole and disappeared around the bend in the den, and sounds of a fight could be heard coming from just inside. Before I could stop him, my brother followed his friend. I was about to sheathe my katana and draw my knife to follow him, when an ear-piercing high-pitched howl came from the tree line. I turned, readying myself for what was inevitably going to hurt, my katana raised. The monstrosity before me wasn't alone. I didn't expect him to be. His timing was just better than I had anticipated. This thing was larger than Scar by at least a foot, and its body told the story of a life full of battles. The tapestry of wounds old and new were a testimony to its resilience. Its head and neck were covered in scars and fresh wounds. Its ears were mangled, and its left eye was long gone from its socket, and it looked to be missing part of its right forepaw. He would not go down easily, I was sure. Luckily for me, he brought friends. The full context of why I was still standing became apparent as the 3 others spread out to encircle me. These things weren't coexistent. Scar and his ilk had been subjugated. The monstrosity's mate was in the den. That's who the howl was for. After all this thing had endured for his pack, now the only thing standing between its freedom and mate was me. It wanted to tear me apart, and everything in its nature was telling me I was prey. Yet it didn't rush in. This thing was planning to use its numbers to attack from all sides. I just couldn't let them get that chance and get to the entrance in the den while my brother was in there. The sounds of a fight could clearly be heard coming from inside, and that was too much for the scar-riddled patriarch. He dropped to all fours and started to edge closer, while the others succeeded in taking the higher ground behind me. I could hear the one on the fallen tree, and one on the other side of it concealed by the tree and roots. The stalemate ended when gunshots rang out from the hole. The one that was creeping up on my left for my legs, while the scarred patriarch launched itself at my chest. His head exploded as a shot rang out, and I shifted my swing and pivoted, stabbing the one who had gone low right between the shoulder blades. I sprawled, kicking my legs out behind me and putting my full weight on the katana, pinning it to the ground. The one who had taken the higher ground behind me, having launched itself with the others, sailed over me. The thing recovered and turned to face me on all fours. Another shot rang out from out of sight, and the den sounded like the 4th of July. I stood up and drew my stepfather's straight sword, having buried a katana to the hilt in the other one. The thing charged, bouncing side to side, trying to get me to shift and expose my weak side. The tactic not paying off, it stood and started to circle. I didn't give it a chance. I stepped forward and to my left, cutting it deeply across the gut. It turned and swung its right arm stiffly, and I stepped in and dodged the attack, slicing its upper thigh and knocking its guts out again. Now behind it, I ignored the pain and took a hold of the sword with both hands. And when it turned to face me, I plunged the sword into its throat, just under its jaw, until it went all the way through. The thing was falling dead before I kicked it off my sword and turned to get my brother, and the shots had stopped. 2 steps towards the entrance, I saw his light and almost collapsed in relief. "Are you all right?" I yelled with my voice cracking. "Not really," he said flatly as he came out of the den, blinding me with the light. Achilles wasn't with him. "Are you in one piece?" he asked. Surprisingly, yeah, I smiled. Thanks to my super sniper and stubborn wife. I teased as my wife walked up in her ghillie suit, carrying her bolt action 30-06. That first shot was miraculous, baby, I said, feeling pretty impressed by her marksmanship. Oh, that bullet was faster than I thought. I was trying for both lungs, she said in a bedroom voice as we kissed, still holding our respective weapons. You need to shower, she said, waving her hand in front of her nose. When I turned back to my brother, he was already back down in a hole. "Hey!" I yelled after him. My wife grabbed my shoulder and shook her head. "Give him a minute," she said softly. A moment later, I could see his light coming back down the tunnel. I braced myself, expecting to see the mangled body of Achilles. Instead, he came out carrying 2 jet black pups with yellow eyes, wrapped in Achilles' vest, to keep them either still or restrained. "Not a word," he said as he started on full-on sobbing. "My best friend died in that hole, and I've had my fill of killing for tonight." Tears flowed down his face like I had never seen before as he went on. "I was going to end him. I just couldn't pull the trigger. God, I wanted to." He sobbed, the words barely understandable. He took several deep breaths and said in a calmer voice, "I'll train him to behave. You'll see." "I can't condone this." "You can't." I started, but he cut me off. "I'm not asking, big brother." The look in his eye and the expression on his face was enough for me to know where this was headed, if I let it. I sheathed the sword and held out my hand, and he gave me my rifle. "I'm going to get my gear and head that way," he muttered. "Tell the kids bye for me. I love you all." He walked off in the direction of the gear we had stashed. I slung my rifle and pulled my katana from the one I had pinned. "We need to check the rest of the bodies before we go," I told my wife as I made my way towards the first skirmish. I became more and more anxious with every body I examined. "What's wrong?" my wife asked, noticing my excitement. He's not here. The son of a bitch ain't here, I said loudly. Who isn't here, love? She asked, voice shaking a little. Scar, I answered flatly. Wow. Wow. Certainly another one. Wow. Absolutely chest pounding, nail biting intense action there. From the one and only incredible mind of James Mitchell. Mighty thank you for you, James, for penning this incredible update. Such lovable characters, and what a rollercoaster ride. Lots of interesting details following along with the Dogman, lore and legends. I particularly liked your touch on the description of the den. Very true to what we believe their den size to look like and how they are constructed. Of course, as ever though, James, I really hope you enjoy this rendition, and I hope you and your family and friends are well, and I wait with bated breath for any updates in the future. Well, guys and girls, as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. Why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. Now, if you think you can pen the next big hit or something of this caliber, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope you all had a fantastic weekend with friends and family, or perhaps you're working over the weekend, doing a night shift, or maybe even a long distance driver. Whatever it is that you do, I hope you're enjoying it and are giving it your all. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.